Summary. The adventure truly begins when the two previously lonely slugcats decide to start working together to accomplish a very important mission. What mishaps will they get into? Chapter 4, Road Trip. Entering the shelter, Hunter was pleasantly surprised to find it quite spacious. He sighed in relief, stretching out his aching limbs as he slumped slightly, exhaustion catching up to him from the hectic cycle. The bigger shelter was especially useful now that he had to share the space with someone else. Hunter scrunched his face up at the thought of sharing a shelter. He was used to being on his own, and while loneliness certainly wasn't what he strived for, it wasn't like he had found anyone to keep him company earlier. Though, even now, when he did find company, he had no real idea what to do about the sudden social contact. Hunter muttered to himself in frustration, glancing back at the shelter's entrance. He wasn't sure why he had offered the white slugcat to come with him. Was it pity? He had felt his heart ache slightly when he'd seen the stranger's reaction to the coming rain, the terrified look in his eyes, the trembling. Hunter frowned. It was the expression of someone who'd died many times to the vicious cycles. He had seen his own fair share of deaths. Just getting to this region from his creator's kin had been difficult enough. Hunter glanced down at the many scars that littered his body. Most were minor injuries, and they healed quickly during the sleep cycles anyway. He reached a paw to his right eye and traced the scar running through the skin. Luckily, his eye hadn't been lacerated during the incident, but it had been a deep wound and had bled quite a bit. Hunter had been lucky not to lose his vision. Hunter shook his head to dispel the thoughts. It was fine to make mistakes, as long as he didn't keep messing up in the future. His delivery mission taken upon him was time-sensitive after all. For more reasons than one. His brain was thankfully supplied, and he growled as he was reminded of the dull ache pulsing through his limbs, the one that had started a couple cycles ago and hadn't really died down yet. He crawled into one of the corners of the shelter and pulled his spear off his back. Its tip was still covered in lizard blood. It's a bit dull, Hunter thought as he absent-mindedly licked the blood of the spear. Luckily, he thought far ahead enough to bring a piece of rubble with him, and he started sharpening the spear. It was like a ritual before sleeping for him at this point, striking the tip of the spear with a sharp piece of metal and hearing the loud clang reverberate in the shelter as sparks flew. After a short while, just as Hunter was considering checking outside for the stranger, the white slugcat finally entered the shelter. Hunter glanced up to look at them as they crawled inside. They were holding 3 of those odd blue fruits Hunter had seen hanging from stalks all over the place, one in each paw and one in their mouth. Hunter had tried to eat a few cycles ago, when he had been very desperate and hungry. They tasted alright, not as good as lizard meat and certainly not as filling. He had no idea why the stranger would willingly eat the fruit to fill their stomach. If they were hungry at all, why didn't they just take a bite of the lizard he killed earlier? Noticing Hunter staring, the slugcat tilted their head and held out one of the fruits towards him questioningly. He grimaced slightly, shook his head, and gestured no thanks before going back to sharpening his spear. From the corner of his vision, Hunter could see the slugcat shrug and crawl over to the opposite corner of the shelter, place the fruit on the ground, and settle down. The mechanics of the shelter whirred loudly as they were shut inside, safely out of harm's way, to hibernate. The only audible sound for a moment was the flowing water outside and the clang of metal on metal reverberating on the walls of the shelter. Hunter, staying completely focused on his task of sharpening his spear, noticed the other slugcat's ears flattening slightly with each loud clang as he ate one of the fruits. He stopped his sharpening process for a moment, raising the spear closer to his eye. It was looking sharper, but he could definitely make it even sharper. Hunter raised the rubble to strike again when, suddenly, the other slugcat finally cleared their throat before speaking. "Thank you," they mumbled, barely audible. Hunter's ear twitched, and he glanced over, lowering the rubble. "They're not mute, then, at least. For rescuing me, I mean." They had a very soft voice, in complete contrast to Hunter's rough and scratchy one. He kept staring in the white slugcat's direction for a moment, until they slightly diverted their gaze, nervously. Hunter sighed to himself. It seemed he was making the other slugcat nervous again. "I really need to stop doing that," he thought as he finally responded. "Sure." It was short and sort of snappy, but the white slugcat seemed a bit happy to get at least a response. Hunter held the slugcat's gaze for a short moment before he looked down at his spear and kept sharpening the weapon. A couple minutes passed before his new roommate spoke again. "My name's Survivor," he motioned to himself as Hunter stopped to look at him. He supposed it was a fitting name. The slugcat seemed to have some experience with this region and, as he'd seen earlier, surviving lizard ambushes. Noticing the slugcat, Survivor, still looking at him, Hunter hummed lowly and prepared to go back to sharpening his spear when Survivor spoke again. "May I ask for your name?" he asked innocently, gesturing in Hunter's general direction. Hunter turned fully towards Survivor, tilting his head. For one moment, Hunter considered just ignoring Survivor, finishing his sharpening, and going to sleep. However, Hunter had a feeling Survivor wouldn't give up until he gave him a proper response, and if he didn't, he'd probably just stare at Hunter sadly for the rest of the cycle, which would make his heart ache and be really annoying. He sighed before pointing to himself with the tip of the spear. "Hunter." Survivor smiled slightly and nodded. "That's a cool name, very fitting." Hunter nodded back and tightened his grip on the spear. It was a fitting name, wasn't it? He was a bloodthirsty predator, after all, having to eat raw and bloody meat to sustain himself, no better than the other violent and ruthless creatures out in the wild. It was probably meant as a sort of compliment. Oh. He lessened his grip on the spear, noticing Survivor's slightly worried stare. He took a deep breath as he attempted to regain his composure. "Thanks, I suppose," Hunter said it gruffly. He was about to go back to sharpening his spear when he realized a conversation probably wasn't supposed to be one-sided, with one side trying to encourage the other, quiet one, to speak. "I should probably ask a question back, then." After a moment of thinking, he looked over at Survivor, who was in the middle of eating another blue fruit. "Why are you hanging around this area anyway? Don't you have a colony or something to go home to?" Hunter knew he had messed up somehow when the other slugcat suddenly paused and turned to him with a pained expression. He thought he could see unshed tears gathering in Survivor's eyes as well. "Oh shit, please don't cry." Well, you could say I've been separated from them," Survivor said, his voice breaking a few times. He was very obviously trying not to cry, only just managing. Hunter paused for a moment, internally panicking. How should he handle this? He didn't mean to make Survivor sad. He just wanted to ask a question. He wanted to comfort and console the fellow slugcat, but he had no idea how to do it. Hunter had no prior experience interacting with other slugcats at all. At most, he knew the basics that his father's creator had taught him. Even then, he had paid way more attention to honing his combat skills than he had to learning about social interaction. "Quick, change the subject or something. I'm here on a very important mission." Hunter blurted it out, perhaps a bit too loudly. Survivor jumped slightly with a squeak and turned to look at him. The previous sadness in his eyes had now instead been replaced with confusion. "Important mission?" he asked, sniffling slightly and tilting his head. "Yeah, here, let me show you," Hunter responded, dropping his piece of rubble before taking a moment to regurgitate the item into his paw. No significant harassment had described it as a green neuron fly, though Hunter still really had no idea what that meant. He placed it in the middle of the shelter, and it floated into the air. Survivor's eyes lit up as the neuron fly started taking on different holographic shapes, none of which were understandable to the slugcat. The shelter was illuminated in green light as the neuron fly did its dance. "Wow, what is that?" Hunter glanced over at Survivor, seeing that the slugcat's eyes were completely transfixed on the object in awestruck fascination. "What I have to deliver," Hunter said matter-of-factly as he picked up the fly and swallowed it again. "It's very important I deliver this item to someone by the name of Looks to the Moon." Survivor sat still and watched with intrigue, captivated. "The mission is time-sensitive and of extreme importance." Survivor tilted his head in confusion again. "Where is this moon person located?" he asked, looking very deep in thought. "I've explored a lot of these lands, but I don't think I've found anything like that." Hunter looked over to Survivor with curiosity. He had been running blind so far, maybe Survivor could help point him in the right direction? They would be located in a can. A big metal box of sorts, supposed to be standing high above the ground on 4 legs. Survivor hummed and seemed deep in thought for a moment before his eyes lit up in recognition. I know where there's a metal box. His excitement died down slightly. Though, it wasn't exactly standing. It seemed pretty dilapidated, like the legs had broken off. Hunter hadn't been told of looks to the moon's exact situation, but he had been told it hadn't been good. It could definitely be that their can had collapsed and broken. Hunter thought over his choices for a moment. He could just ask Survivor for directions, but considering he had never been in these regions before, he probably would just get lost. Maybe he can draw a map? He looked around the shelter. There were no materials around that could accomplish something like this. Maybe he can follow along as a guide? He sighed. It seemed to be the best option for the situation. Although Hunter had slightly warmed up to Survivor, he still was not used to having a traveling buddy. The other slugcat would probably just slow him down. But it'll probably be faster than losing my way and getting lost anyway. With a sigh, he turned to the other slugcat, who was busy gorging on their last blue fruit. How would you feel about coming along on my mission? Survivor stopped mid-chew and turned to Hunter, looking shocked. You want me to come along? He asked in disbelief. Hunter winced slightly, scratching at one of the scars on his forearm. I am in need of a guide, and you seem to know your way around. He responded, averting his eyes and almost sounding unsure of himself. He turned back to Survivor, giving him a serious look. It will be very dangerous, but you seem capable and experienced in the task. Survivor looked away slightly, smiling. Is he blushing? No, he's probably just nervous. Sure, I'll come along, he said eventually, looking at Hunter and beaming a smile. Hunter released a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding, nodding towards the other slugcat. Good. When we wake up, you show me where to go, and I'll lead the way, all right? Survivor gave him a mock salute. Yes, sir. Before Hunter could properly respond to this action, Survivor curled up and laid down on the shelter floor, yawning. Good night, Hunter. The white slugcat closed his eyes, and almost immediately, soft snores could be heard from his corner of the shelter. Hunter stood still in shock for a moment before sighing to himself and looking towards his spear. He considered sharpening it a bit more, but considering the loudness of the action could wake up his new traveling buddy, he decided against it. Instead, he curled up in his own corner of the shelter. What have I agreed to? Hunter thought as he fell asleep. Survivor had always hated moving through the big gates, decontamination gates, as Hunter had called them. They were huge and intricate pieces of loud machinery that made his ears hurt. He always felt like there was a risk that they could fall apart at any moment and crush him. He whined slightly as the gate doors slammed shut behind him. He'd never get used to traveling through these things, though he supposed he had to if they were going to travel to the moon person's metal box. He remembered he'd seen the box very long ago, when he'd traveled far east in search of any way to get back to his colony. The region where he'd seen the metal box had been covered in a vast ocean, with water stretching as far as the eye could see. Survivor had quickly turned around. He hated water and didn't want anything to do with the region. Though he remembered he had seen a massive box of metal in the far distance, he wasn't sure if it was the exact metal box Hunter was looking for, but it was worth checking out. During his first cycles in these lands, he passed through a lot of these gates in his search for the way back to his family. When he'd explored as far as he felt he could, he decided to travel back to the region with the least amount of threat to settle down. In other words, he gave up and came to the conclusion that he probably was never going to meet another of his kind again. But then Hunter arrived, and he saved him. If Survivor were honest, Hunter scared him slightly. For being a slugcat, he seemed very strong and fast, and when he spoke, Survivor could sometimes catch glimpses of very sharp teeth, sharper than his, at least. Nevertheless, Hunter had saved him from certain death, and so Survivor owed Hunter his life, and he would help him with his incredibly important mission any way he could. Though he was guiding Hunter where to go, he was still more of a sidekick. Survivor showed Hunter where to go. Hunter led the way while Survivor followed him. This was all fine and dandy to him. Hunter was clearly the more skilled of the two, so it was better if he took the lead and took care of any threats. Survivor had quickly noticed the only difference between him and Hunter wasn't just strength and combat experience. Shortly before the decontamination gate, they ran into another pink lizard. Hunter, unsurprisingly, killed it with ease. With a small huff, he turned to Survivor and spoke. "This should be enough food for the cycle, even split evenly between us." Hunter had been very confused when Survivor explained he couldn't eat the lizard. It wasn't that he was denying the food, it was just that his teeth weren't sharp enough to chew through the tough meat of the lizard. After a short explanation of their differences, Hunter nodded and, rather messily, ate a piece of the lizard, then helped Survivor hunt for batflies and pick blue fruit. When they had felt fully satisfied, they moved on. As steam rose up around them, Survivor glanced over at Hunter. He stood ramrod straight with a very serious expression on his face. He was playing around with the spear in his paws, passing it from left to right, and Survivor could see how tense he was. He probably didn't like the gates either, Survivor reckoned. Finally, the gate doors opened, and Survivor and Hunter hurried to climb through the pipe leading to the outside. What greeted them outside were more metal platforms and pipes, but it was obviously a different region. In Survivor's opinion, it felt more industrial than the previous one. Hunter looked around curiously, completely new to this region. "All right, where to next?" he asked, looking at Survivor, who hummed and looked around again. Yeah, he definitely recognized this area. "We have to climb up those poles and go through a few pipes to get to the next gate." He pointed at the poles leading up to the sky. They stretched on quite far, but they only had to climb halfway to get to where they needed to go. "Through that pipe, there's a shelter." Survivor looked up into the sky. It was free of clouds for now. "But I think we have time to get to a shelter in the next region if we're quick and careful enough." Hunter hummed thoughtfully before nodding and stealing his expression. "We'll be fast, let's go," Hunter said before taking off. Survivor had to hurry his pace to follow Hunter up the pole. Hunter was very fast and could easily outrun Survivor, but he always seemed to make sure to stay in a spot where Survivor could easily see him and catch up if he fell behind. He ended up getting so distracted by his thoughts that he almost forgot to tell Hunter they were getting off the poles halfway up. Once notified, Hunter decided to jump off the pole in a very cool way. He leaped off the pole quite high, landed in a roll, and pouched perfectly into the pipe. Just before going through, he looked back at Survivor, who was staring at him in awestruck shock. "Come on. We can't waste time." Survivor was really happy. Hunter immediately went through the pipe afterwards, so he couldn't catch the way his face was blushing red. They ended up making very good time on their short trip across the region. Though they ran into a couple lizards on the way, it was nothing Hunter couldn't easily handle. After a bit more travel where nothing of note happened, they reached the room before the gate. Climbing down a pole, Survivor looked over the murky green waters towards a pipe. "Through the gate to the next region, there's a shelter right after that we can rest in." He sniffed the air and recoiled in disgust. He had forgotten about the smell of garbage that permeated the area. Hunter seemed to have the same reaction, looking disgusted and shuddering as he stepped into the waist-high water. "Let's hope the shelter is dry and doesn't smell like trash." Out of nowhere, a worm-like creature suddenly popped out of the water. Hunter yelped and wound back to throw a spear, only to find it snatched by the other creature that had popped up behind him. The worm quickly retreated under the water with his spear before he could react. "Hey, that's my spear." While Hunter was distracted by the worm behind him, the other one snatched the spear from his back and retreated underwater. Survivor had forgotten about those weird worm things. They were an annoyance, but they were not dangerous. He had to stifle a laugh when Hunter turned to glare at him, looking incredibly grumpy. "Don't worry, we'll find you new spears next cycle." Survivor said it jokingly. Hunter groaned and turned around, marching through the water towards the pipe. "Whatever," he grumpily said. As Survivor moved to catch up with him, he could hear him mutter something akin to "could have at least warned me" under his breath. He barked a laugh of amusement, and Hunter turned to glare at him, though Survivor could see him struggling not to smile. He does have a sense of humor, after all. Survivor thought, happy that Hunter wasn't a super serious badass all the time. After passing through a pipe, the duo stepped through the karma gate leading to the next region. Survivor smiled to himself as he remembered which region they were headed to. I hope Hunter doesn't mind more of his spears getting stolen, he thought, stifling another laugh.
I decided to try to write slightly longer chapters to ensure the story doesn't drag on for like 60+ chapters. I don't have the energy for such a long story, LMAO. Enjoy.